and welcome to the Confusion to Clarity podcast. This podcast is for anybody who needs that reminder that they really are capable of achieving amazing things. Each week, we will be diving deep into all things mindset, manifestation, and spirituality. Hosted by me, Natalie, a clinical hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, coach, mum, and lover of all things mindset and manifestation. When listening, I want to give you a break from reality. I'm going to share with you the tools and techniques that you need to make your goals reality so you can stop playing small. Hello and welcome back to the Confusion to Clarity podcast. I hope you're well and that you've had an amazing week. So in last week's episode, I shared how I've jumped from my 40s to old age by downloading the app that listens to bird song around you and helps you identify which bird is singing. The reason I did this, if you haven't listened to the episode, is because there was a bird singing in the tree outside my window before 5 a.m. every morning. And it was so flippin' annoying. I wanted to know what it was. Anyhow, I downloaded the app, identified the bird, and then became really interested in using this app on a daily basis, kind of wherever I was, because it was so mindful. And this was one of the things I really noticed, that when you were using the app, your mind wasn't drifting away. You were thinking about where you were at that time. It was enabling you to be present. And I actually had so many people message me off the back of that episode saying they too have downloaded the app. So I'm not the only one, which makes me feel comforted. And who knows, an episode soon might be sponsored by this app. We will see. But that does lead me on to this week's episode and about recognizing when our minds are busy, when we are feeling emotionally depleted. But specifically today, I wanted to look at the exhaustion of holding everything together. And I'm sure so many of you listening will be nodding along in agreement with what I say in this episode, because it's a topic that affects so many women. And as I often say, this is something that comes up weekly, multiple times a week, with the clients that I work with, and it's something that I can personally relate to too. And that really is the exhaustion of holding everything together. What you notice is on the outside, you can look completely capable. You're functioning, you're working, you're parenting, you're replying to messages, you're organizing things, you're showing up. And people would probably describe you as being strong, reliable, the one who's always, sorted and organized. But internally, you feel mentally overloaded, you feel emotionally drained, and it's really like your brain just never switches off or even slows down. But sometimes you don't even realize how exhausted you are because you're the one being the one who copes. Because that's become such a normal part of your identity, you just aren't even aware. And as I said, this is something I see so frequently. High functioning women, capable women, women who hold a lot emotionally for other people, but eventually it catches up with the nervous system, because if we're constantly carrying the mental and the emotional load of everything, it is exhausting. And I think one of the hardest things about this type of exhaustion is that it's often invisible. Well, until you probably get to a point where you lose your shit and then everybody knows. But people see what you do. They don't see what your brain is doing. So they don't see how day in, day out, you're overthinking, anticipating, emotionally monitoring. They don't see the planning ahead, the mental lists, the constant scanning for problems, that permanent on switch. And many women become what I call the default nervous system for everybody else around them, because you're not just thinking about yourself, you're thinking about everybody else. You're thinking ahead for everybody else. You're managing everybody. You're monitoring everybody. You're trying to prevent problems before they even happen and arise. And when you live like that for long enough, your body can actually forget how to relax. And I say this all the time. We have to learn to relax, which seems crazy, but for many women who are falling into this bracket, we just don't know how to switch off and relax. And what you probably find is also that your body and mind just don't know how to switch off and relax, even when there's nothing technically wrong. So even if there isn't anything pressing, it's that anticipation that something might come up, being on guard. And I think this is the really important part, because sometimes women say to me, I don't understand why I can't switch off. There's nothing really pressing that needs my attention right now. There's nothing bad happening. In theory, it should be fairly quiet. But our nervous system isn't responding purely to the current circumstances. What it's doing is it's responding to the patterns It's responding to the responsibility, the pressure, the emotional unpredictability. It's responding to the hypervigilance, feeling like you always have to be on and on guard, like I was saying. But what happens is over time, your body starts to associate safety with control. So, this is where we find relaxing can feel uncomfortable, stillness feels uncomfortable, rest feels uncomfortable, because your nervous system has become so used to functioning in alert mode that that is your default setting. And then this can obviously show up in relationships too, particularly when someone feels like they're carrying the emotional labor. So if in the partnership you are primarily the planner, the organizer, the one who has to bring conversations up, the one who has to, initiate difficult conversations, the one who has to think ahead, the one who notices tension, the one who keeps things moving, it can really create a strange mix of love, resentment, exhaustion, guilt, and emotional loneliness. I can never say that word, loneliness. What we often find is these women don't necessarily want perfection. They just want to feel emotionally held sometimes too. They want someone else to take the lead, not always, but occasionally. They want someone else to notice, to initiate, to just help carry some of that emotional weight, the emotional burden that us women carry. And when that doesn't happen consistently, the nervous system stays in that state of, I can't fully let go because everything rests on me. And that is exhausting, not just mentally, but physically too, because the body keeps a score of chronic emotional pressure. And I think there's a huge difference between being capable and feeling emotionally safe. A lot of women have become so focused on coping that what they've actually done is lost touch with what safety feels like. Because you can be high functioning and still deeply anxious underneath. You can appear calm externally whilst internally scanning constantly. I mean, how many of us have ever sat there having a conversation and your mind's thinking about a million different things at the same time? And as women, we don't often realize how much adrenaline we're running on until we actually stop. And this is why sometimes when women do finally sit down or finally get that moment to themselves, their brain starts to spiral because the nervous system finally has space to release everything that it's been holding on to. So when you do stop, that's when you're going to notice the overthinking kicking in or really ramping up. The catastrophizing starts to begin. What if this happens? What if that happens? Relationship anxiety appears, emotional overwhelm floods in. And this isn't because you are weak, but it's because your body has been running in survival mode for so long. And I really think another important conversation here is around identity, because many women become deeply attached to being the dependable one. You become used to being the helper, the fixer, the strong one. And these are qualities, like, don't get me wrong, these are absolutely beautiful qualities to have. But sometimes underneath that identity is a nervous system that doesn't feel safe enough to put things down. Sometimes there's fear around disappointing people. It could be losing control. It could be being perceived as selfish. That comes up a lot when people start to put boundaries in and say no. It makes you feel like, oh God, I'm being bad, I'm being really mean. Sometimes there can be fears around not being needed or letting people down. So, what we find is women continue carrying enormous amounts of emotional load. So, what we see here is women continuing to carry enormous emotional loads while simultaneously wondering why they feel so burnt out, so exhausted, so drained. But often they minimize it. They say things like, oh, I'm just tired, I'm just stressed, even beating themselves up. I need to manage my time better. But sometimes the issue isn't poor time management. Sometimes it's chronic emotional responsibility. And I think the healing work here really is about beginning to create more internal safety. It's not about externally managing life better, but it's about teaching your nervous system that you don't have to live in constant alert mode, that it's okay to step down, that you are safe. It's about teaching your nervous system that you don't have to anticipate every possible problem, that you don't have to have, carry everybody's emotional load, to understand that when you do stop and when you do rest, it isn't laziness, and that slowing down isn't failure. And again, I see this so often where people have grown up being rewarded for being busy, not being allowed to sit down and rest and slow down, being constantly on their feet. And that is almost a sign of achievement. But the thing here is, this isn't something that changes overnight. These patterns, these ways of being, are deeply ingrained because you would have been doing them for a very, very long time. Some women, this could be decades functioning in this way. But the key thing is awareness. That is the most powerful step. If you can start to acknowledge these things within yourself, when you have that awareness, that's when you can begin to make change, slow, incremental changes. Because when you start to recognize the patterns, what you will notice is you stop automatically believing this is just who I am. And instead, you can begin asking, what has my nervous system adapted to? And that changes everything. So what I wanted to do before I wrap up this episode today was to share a few practical things that you can do. So if you've been listening to this episode and you recognized yourself in it, I wanted to share a few things that you could try, because I always think it's great highlighting and making yourself aware of something, but then the next step is, okay, well, now I know I feel this way, how am I going to change it? What can I do? And these aren't about making huge, overwhelming changes, like there's enough on your plate, but just small little things that can begin calming the nervous system and beginning to reduce the emotional load. So the first one is to start noticing how often you are on duty mentally. So even when nobody has asked you to be, notice how often you anticipate. How often do you overmanage? How often do you emotionally monitor? Mentally rehearse conversations, solve problems before they exist. And I know I'm a key one for that. It's like, okay, well, if that happens, then I'll do this. And then, if that happens, then that will happen. And like we've been saying, it's all about this control. But the awareness of this is absolutely huge. The second thing is to practice allowing small moments of incompletion. Now, for people who are high functioning and a level of perfectionism there, incompletion can feel like, oh my God, no way could I do that. But not everything has to be optimized, finished, or managed immediately. Your nervous system needs moments where nothing is being urgently solved. And it can be even tiny moments that help. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I know, let's just say you've given yourself permission to sit down with a cup of tea. You've got to do the school run in a bit. The washing machine's been on and you're thinking, oh, I want to get that washing on the line. I'm going to get that out before the school run because it's bound to rain otherwise. And you hear the washing machine finish. Now, instantly your brain's probably going to tell you something like, oh, washing machine's finished, get up, now stop what you're doing, go get the washing out because you've got to get to school, blah, blah, blah. It could just be sitting for a few minutes longer, acknowledging that thought. My brain is telling me to get up and move now and go and hang the washing out. But I'm just going to choose to sit for a few seconds before I get up and do that. And I know that might sound really small and insignificant, but if we can make small incremental changes, they lead to the bigger changes. It's all about teaching your nervous system that it's safe. And this isn't about dropping the ball, lowering your standards, absolutely nothing at all like that. It's about you starting to take control of your life rather than external influences dictating it for you. It could be even when the kids come home from school, allowing yourself just to sit and be with them for 5 or 10 minutes, sit away from them if you need to, if you've got teenagers, and just take a few moments to just, decompress from the busyness of the school run before you jump up and start making dinner. The third one is to ask yourself whether you feel safe or simply in control, because those are not always the same thing. A lot of women think, if I can just stay on top of everything, then I can feel calm. But often the nervous system remains activated underneath. So the real safety feels different. Real safety feels softer, less hyper alert, less performative, less exhausting. And I wanted to add another one in there, which is to start practicing asking for help. When you've been carrying everything for so long, as we've been discussing, it becomes a default setting. It's almost like you don't know another way of being. But now you're bringing your conscious awareness to it. Now you're noticing this. It's like, oh, hold on. I am doing a lot of the emotional labor. And asking yourself, if this wasn't the case, how would things look? If things were more fairly split, if I felt more supported, what would that look like? And to start asking for small incremental areas of help, small little bits of help. That could be asking somebody to do the school run for you, or even if you don't feel comfortable physically asking at this stage. As you know, if you're a regular listener of the podcast, your mind doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. You could just sit and start mentally rehearsing in your mind what life would look like if you were able to advocate for yourself, if you were able to give yourself permission to relinquish some of this control that you hold on to. And if you can practice this in your mind, see it clearly, feel the feelings that accompany it, you will then start to see it in your physical reality, or feel able to ask for it in your physical reality. So I just wanted to add that one in there as an extra. And finally, I just wanted to wrap up by saying, if this has resonated, if you've really been feeling exhausted lately, emotionally overloaded, like your brain never switches off, I really want you to know this, that just because you've become good at carrying everything, it doesn't mean you were meant to carry it all alone. And sometimes healing isn't about becoming better at coping. Sometimes it's about finally allowing yourself to stop living in survival mode. I've had a client only today where we've been working together now for a few months, and I'm going off on a tangent. This wasn't on my notes. And she was a prolific people pleaser. And she would say yes when she wanted to say no. And recently, there's been a few examples where she has started to advocate for herself. First of all, she'd been carrying the lion's share of all the emotional elements of her relationship. She was caring for family members. And recently, she's just started to say, I can't keep doing this. And she's put some markers in place to help alleviate some of the pressure that she's been feeling. And some of the things she shared with me today was so profound. I was so proud of her, because I was like, oh my gosh, look how far you've come. Previously, you would never have allowed yourself to say no to that. Previously, you would have pushed yourself to go to that event or do those things. And now you're just doing it automatically without really overthinking it, and without any form of self-sabotage creeping in off the back when she has set that boundary. She's clear in her mind now what she wants. She sets a boundary and she sticks to that boundary and doesn't waver. So, yeah, I really hope this episode has resonated with you and just made you feel that you are not alone. So, as always, thank you so much for listening. I hugely appreciate it and really hope that you got something from it. If you want to find out about working with me, all the details of how to do that are in the show notes below. There's also links there for my social media, ways to reach out. And don't forget, I also host a free meditation class online via Zoom on the first Monday of every month. As I said, completely free to join. There's no participation required. It's a space just to show up, camera off, mic off, and just take half an hour, 45 minutes of just peaceful relaxation and meditation. So if you'd like to come along, there's a link below in the show notes. Click the link, join the group, and it would be amazing to see you there. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Take care.